Welcome along. Rosalind and I are going to have a friendly chat as a couple of veteran homeschooling mums, just talking over some of what can be very basic concerns, but very important concerns that people considering or just starting out may have. So, Rosalind, thank you so much for joining me for a virtual chat. It's lovely to meet you, first of all. Thank you.
Likewise.
Whereabouts are you in New Zealand, Rosalind?
We live in Masterton.
Oh, okay.
In the Wairarapa.
Yes. That's probably about 6 hours drive from me. I'm up on Auckland's North Shore, so yeah, you're just down the road.
Yeah.
No doubt you've had similar experiences as what we have had over the years, and that you tell someone that you're homeschooling or you're home educating, and you get plied with a few questions pretty soon. And one of the first questions that people respond with is what we call the S word, socialisation. That's the great concern. Other people are always so concerned on our behalf for our children. If you could be bothered getting into a conversation with a complete stranger, what would you say? And if it was just, say, a friend who was genuinely interested, what would you respond to that question of socialisation?
Yes, school's not the only place where we interact. And, well, we had 5 children, so I think, I don't think... I could see if you were just homeschooling one child, that might be more of a concern because you have less contact with other people. But, I mean, we had playtimes and lunchtimes, and the kids just got out there and played games all together. And I think they do learn. They did learn, I think siblings do rub off the rough edges. And I think even in a school, well, I've observed in a school, children choose their friends and they choose who not to associate with as well. And whereas your family, you don't get away from. And they're life skills that you learn getting on. I think it's hardest to get on with those most closest to you or in your family. Yeah, and I think also our kids learnt someone commented to me about, well, your children can speak with adults. So we would go to the library each week and get books out. And I noticed over time the kids would always be just talking to the library staff. They'd be interested, the staff would be asking them about books. And they were really, they commented it on after a time, your kids know how to talk to adults. And it was interesting because then I started noticing when I had my kids' friends who went to school around, some of them, that they'd nearly not be able to say boo to you, to an adult. And I remember once our children, a friend at church, her children were going to swimming lessons, and our kids went to the same, I think our kids had been or something. And she said, what's it like going to a place where you don't know anyone? Well, I suppose we'd always had that because we'd go places and we didn't know anyone. And so there was nothing new about not knowing anybody, whereas the children are used to just being in that school situation and they know all the kids in their class. But they would, that was I suppose it's a bit of a security and a comfort thing for them, whereas when they head off to the public pool and all of a sudden, I don't know anyone, I don't want to go. That was more of a hurdle for them to overcome. Remember, I think also children will be a bit like your parents. If you're a social person, likely you can have kids who are social, and if you're more introverted, well, your children will reflect you. I think our children reflect both of us, and that way my husband's a lot more extrovert, I suppose, out there, and whereas I'm sort of more quiet person. And I think our children are a bit of a mix in that way. One funny thing that I do remember is it is the big thing that people have. It is the big question on other people's minds. And I remember someone saying to me after a few years, well, your children are actually normal. And I thought,
gee, thanks.
What's he talking about?
It's a bit of an urban myth. I don't know really where that first question would come from. I'm assuming that people wrongly assume that because you homeschool, you stay at home all the time. We never came across anyone who didn't go out and didn't see people. It was so. I mean, my typical kind of kickback, if you like, was, some days I have to say to the kids, you know what, kids, I think we better stay home and get some bookwork done today, and it would kind of disarm, in a polite, friendly way, the person who was very concerned and veiled accusing, actually, that you were going to be doing some harm to your children socially. And they would just kind of like laugh, and and they were the ones that were put at ease. But the concept of socialization is an interesting one, because what are you socializing your children in if you're at school or at home? And often what they're being socialized in at school isn't actually what you would want them socialized in at all. And then there's also to bear in mind that in a school setting, they're learning socialization with one age group, which is the only time in their life that they are ever, by no choice of their own, have to mix with and socialize one particular age group. And that became one of the strengths of the homeschooling or home educated children, is that because quite quickly they were getting used to socializing and getting on with children and adults of all ages. And sometimes our kids didn't even know how old some of the other children were that they were chatting to and getting on with at the functions and sporting and events that we would go to. So like you, when we look back over the years, we had 5 children, and all of them quite different. We had, an introvert right down at the extreme end, and we had an extrovert right up the other end, and kind of 3 in between. But all of them learned to socialize. All of them could look an adult in the eye when they were greeted. They didn't have to have a conversation with them. My very introverted daughter, I've brought her up that you don't have to have a conversation, but if they say hello to you, just look them in the eye and say hello back to them. That's all you have to do. Just be polite. So I think the socialization one, have a good comeback for them that doesn't belittle or insult the person who's asking. But by the same token, neither do you feel you should have to get into a conversation with a complete stranger. You're under no obligation at all. It's actually none of their business, really, how you're going to socialise the children. Would you say that to somebody who went to school? Well, what about socialising with all of those different children in the classroom? Those ones who are really rude to the teacher. What are you going to do about that? I haven't actually come across anybody asking that question, actually, but it's a fair enough question.
No.
What do you think is a good approach right from the beginning if someone's not sure? How would you advise them, Rosalind, to go about those early days of thinking through should they or shouldn't they?
I think it's, as you were saying, the why. I think you really need to know why. And if you don't really know why, well, then maybe it's not something to do, because you need to know why you're doing it. That'll keep you going on the hard days. I think it's very important that both parents be in agreement. Okay, mum might be doing all the work, but that's in our situation. Dad went off to work, so I was home with the children all day. Someone said to me, it's a bit like when you're homeschooling, it's a bit like going out, having a job, come home to a messy house. Because, if you go off to work, well, your house is clean, but when you homeschool, you're working, but you're at home, and the mess is, there is a mess. You're not going to have a pristine house. And so both, if you've got a dad that comes home and expects everything to be just shipshape, you've got to be understanding and supportive that that's the way things are. I think being really important about why. And the other thing is give it a go. There's nothing and see. I suppose we started homeschooling not with the intention of doing it forever. Our eldest was my husband is dyslexic, and never learnt to read till he was 11 or 12, when his mother sort of taught him after school and shut all the curtains, and he learnt to read. He was in he grew up in a mill town, and I think one year he had 7 different teachers, so it wasn't conducive to good learning at the school he went. And if you've got learning difficulties, that only increases that barrier. And because our eldest was a bit like, it's a lifestyle, I suppose. And
yeah, that's good. I think you're right. Being in agreement together is really important. And if your husband is really against it, that's going to be a tough ride for a while. So it's a really good idea to sort your philosophy out, your why, right from the beginning, and to figure it out. What are the things that he's uncomfortable with, or you're not too sure about yourself? What does this actually mean? Start asking questions of people like Rosalind and I that have done this for a long time, and we can answer your questions. You don't have to commit yourself to it forever. That's so true. We kind of had on a year-by-year basis too. Actually, that was more to set other people at ease, because they were always so worried for us. What are you going to do when your child's at intermediate? What about high school? And I would just say, oh, well, we'll make a decision as each year goes by. And it was all they needed. You could see them like calm down. And once again, it was like, would you stop worrying about our children? They're our responsibility. And I think that the concept of what does it actually mean to educate your children? You're doing it from the day that they're born, are you not? Isn't that what you're
That's
doing?
right.
You're talking to them. You're taking them everywhere you go. You're wiggling little colourful toys in front of them right from their early days and trying to work with their vision. Is that not education? Isn't that what you're doing? So the only difference between preschool and getting to 5 or 6 is the detail, really. You either decide to delegate or you carry on. And I don't think you need to know absolutely everything before you start. I mean, if you think of, well, let's take marriage, for instance. I can remember going, but I don't know what's going to happen in 20 years. Will I still love my husband in 20 years? What if I don't? Does that mean I should get married next week? And it was, well, I don't, nobody knows, because nobody's got a crystal ball, but I knew what I knew today. And I had the faith and the confidence to go, well, I'm going to move into the future knowing what I'm confident in right now. And I'll visit my 20 years when I actually get there. And I think that's kind of similar with, your homeschooling. Just start with today. You don't need to know what it's going to be like when they're 12, 16. You'll prepare. You'll know when you get there. I was going to say a book like For the Children's Sake, which came out in the 80s by Susan Schaefer Macaulay. That's still a bestseller, I found out last week. I think that's amazing. Did you read that one, Rosalind?
Yes, I remember that book.
Oh, it was just so very encouraging. And I think you wouldn't be here unless you were prepared to do investigations and reading and asking around. Well, it's no different for other aspects in your life, say like homeschooling. Go and do your research and grow in your knowledge. Rosalind, how did you ever know when you had your kids at home, how did you ever know that they were learning properly? Was that a concern for you? I had a young homeschooling mum ask me this. I was doing some consulting with her and she said, how do I know that they're learning properly? What would you say to that one?
If they're understanding the work they're doing, then you know they're learning. And if you're doing it every day, in New Zealand we have to be as regular and as efficient as, are they the two words? Used to be regular as efficient as a school. Well, your children will learn, I've had people ask me that too. And I did find, one book I had, I think it was also a was one in that series of Susan Schaefer Macaulay about what children need to know year by year, and I used that as quite a good checklist or a guide as to what that was a helpful thing. The New Zealand curriculum, well, we have to follow that. But when back then it was very vague, you could make anything fit that.
It still is.
Whereas having specific things, this is what we, in year 1 or year 2 in maths, this is what we're doing. Yeah, you know what they've got to achieve. They do it. You can go for standardised tests. In New Zealand, we have the PAT tests that are administered every year. I bought a few of us in our homeschooling group. We use those. For peace of mind for me, I found it was quite good to do those. And you pick out areas that, actually, this is something we're weak on or something we haven't covered. Something objective can be a helpful thing. But generally, I've found, you find out if the children know what you've learnt, what they've been doing or not, because when they move to the next step, they either can or can't do it, because learning is cumulative, and and sometimes for some of our children, they needed more. That's the beauty of homeschooling. Children can learn at their own pace, and for those who sort of can manage, who learn things easily, they don't need to always be waiting. You can just move on at your pace. Whereas if you need, especially I think it suits those children who need that extra reinforcement, is very helpful. They don't feel that pressure to compare with, not keeping up with everyone else. They just work at their rate, learn at their rate.
Or too embarrassed to ask. I can remember really wanting to know, but also being laughed at by some of the other kids in the class because, she doesn't get it. So that put me off ever asking in class. And the amount of times I sat there going, I don't understand. And it just had to pass me by because I wasn't going to risk being laughed at again. So, and I think nobody knows your child like you do. Nobody else in the whole wide world. You get a very good clue very quickly when they're bored, when something is too much, and you can sense quite quickly when to pull back. Are they ready for the next level of maths? Maths, I think, for us was quite easy for us to see where a child was up to because it was very sequential and it was based on a class or an age or a grade. And I was never capable of designing my own maths program. That wasn't for me. So it was quite easy for us to follow in books and where, if they've got a block, say, on times tables, but they sail through geometry, we'll spend some more time on their times tables. If they get geometry, there's no need to keep on and on with it, just keep moving on. The Charlotte Mason approach that we used a lot, it became very clear if a book was too far above their level. You could choose spelling from those books. And did they understand or comprehend what they were reading? Well, you knew because they had to either tell something back to you, father could ask them something at the tea table, or they might pop up with it themselves because they're so excited, or they would write something as part of a writing lesson. So you could ascertain quite easily, is my child learning through this book? Is it too hard? Is it too easy? And then, as you say, Rosalind, it's one of the privileges of homeschooling is that you can pivot, you can stay, you can take leaps, you can take breaks, you can get a tutor if you need to. There's so many options. Whereas I think in a classroom, if a child is especially bright, and in New Zealand at the moment, they don't separate out kids who are quite bright and could go into accelerated learning. They used to, but at the moment it's still kind of more socialist in their outlearnings, that everybody's got to have the same outcome. The equity is still got our schools by the throat, if you like. We're waiting for that to go. So a child who is bored in a New Zealand class because he or she knows it just simply has to sit there and wait. And then what is properly anyway? How do you know if your child is learning properly? how do you define properly anyway? Whose concept are we using here? I thought that was an interesting word to even use. What is proper?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you
I
can
think it is a concern that people have,
Yeah.
Are they, I suppose, the comparison thing. And I've noted with people that I know that are homeschooling and their relatives and that, they're always as cousins. Oh, can you read this, or can you do that? A real comparison thing. It's a sort of a bit of a check. Are they doing what they need to be doing, or are they up with everybody?
Yes. That's an interesting one. That goes very nicely into one of the other things that was on our little list of things of what to do, because a question that I would get asked sometimes from people, homeschool parents who needed help, was that, what do I do with my father? He keeps testing my children, that kind of thing. And you kind of intimated that you might have had something along those lines. We certainly did. So, and it's a bit difficult because you've got family dynamics that are just kind of compounding an issue, because you might have this relationship with your father where you feel that it's wrong to kind of confront or to be firm with him or something like that, and thereby allow him to do or treat or test your children when you feel really uncomfortable with that, when it isn't actually the best thing for your children. So I had to figure out what I was going to do about that, because sometimes somebody would say to one of our kids, "What's 6 times 7? We're only visiting them for afternoon tea, for goodness sake." "How do you spell balloon?" So I knew we were going to have to do something, because it was interfering with the grandparent-grandchild relationship as well. They just wanted to be and enjoy their granddad. And so in the end I said to them, "Okay, kids," which was a good socialization thing and how to deal with conflict. "If Granddad says to you, 'What is 6 times 7 or whatever, just politely say back to him, 'Mum says I don't have to answer that.'" And I felt really brave even teaching my children, but I knew that it was what was best for my children, not what was best. Was I willing to rock a boat within my family? I had to say yes, I was, because my children's priority was what had to come first. So, so the first day that they did that, actually they only had to do it once. And the look on the face, and it wasn't rude or anything, but it was like, and props to Dad, who suddenly kind of realized, oh, okay, maybe this isn't actually a good idea, so it did change the dynamics. But I think it's really important. People are just interested in wanting to know, how are your kids doing? Again, it's none of their business, but they do.
Oh, yes.
So, yeah, how do you deal with other people who are always testing your kids? Or when are you going to go to proper school? I heard somebody say to me in the weekend. What do you mean? She had a good answer like 2 hours later.
One example, situation that I remember quite clearly, I really felt sorry for this homeschooling mum. Her eldest was the age of our youngest, and she started homeschooling, but all her husband's family were teachers. So her mother-in-law was a teacher, her father-in-law was a school principal, uncles and aunts were teachers, and her husband was working in IT. None of them lived in our town, so that probably did help. But it was like, well, you can homeschool, but there was the expectation that her child would be sort of streets above everybody else. You know what I mean? There was just, as long as she's doing better than everybody else, this was okay. And it was a terrible pressure on the mum. And of course, I think she would dread when they would go up, to visit family, or the family would come. They moved away, so I'm never quite sure how that ended up. But it's just not a nice pressure. It was very, yeah, it's like, and I think it became a bit of a thing that she was on trial then with her husband, because yeah, you get that from your family. And it was their first child, and, you're wanting to do the best, and it was difficult.
It's interesting when your decisions become other people's judgments and it's their own doing. I mean, I can't do anything about that, but the other thing that we all have in common with each other, whether or not we homeschool and whatever approach we take, is that by nature we're contrarians. We do approach things in a different way. So that's another good idea, is to get like-minded people around you that you don't have to keep explaining yourself to, that aren't going to judge you, and accept that outside of that safety net, people are always watching. If you're in a subculture, people are always watching, because it's just the way humans are. I mean, I knew we were being watched for years by my parents, and then I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years in, we had a positive comment from them. Chris, you're doing really well, and I thought, thank you. And I appreciated them saying that. But that became something I had to deal with. I knew I was being watched. How was I going to cope with that? So, it was a character development thing for me. I didn't anticipate having to deal with that, but I did.
I think we don't need to feel like we always have to be justifying ourselves. To everybody,
and I don't think you should have to either, because the homeschool mum I was consulting with a couple of months ago, I said to her, you may actually get to the point where if he keeps challenging the same thing over and over again, you are going to have a firm but loving conversation with him and draw some boundaries. This is your life, it's your child. He has no business interfering. He can be concerned, but you need to be if you need to have the difficult conversation, you need to have it. So
On the other, I agree if that persists, but I think we need to be careful not to be reactionary as well.
Yes.
I think the product speaks for itself. They see. The proof is in the pudding. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, isn't it? And I think, especially grandparents, they like to see children that are well-mannered and interested, and start to appreciate your children for who they are, rather than these people that are going against the grain, because that's what it is. And it's a good thing for children to learn that too, that we don't all do the same. And I think with people that are not, well, grandparents aside, I think other people quickly feel like we're judging them, that they're not doing it, or that it's something that we think they need to do. And I think just saying things like, well, it's not for everybody.
That's right. There can be a range of reactions amongst your family and friends, and it would be a good idea to be what is it, to be forearmed? Is it to be forewarned, or is it the other way around? Just be ready with something, so that, as you say, you're not going to react and regret what you've said. You don't want to be creating unnecessary conflict in the family. So don't wait until it gets so bad before you just suddenly explode, because that's what we tend to do in New Zealand. We don't tend to deal with something in the early stages, and this is one of the cases where it actually would be a good idea. You took your kids through the high school years. How did you manage that? What was the difference between educating kids through the high school years as opposed to the primary years? Did you have any worries about that?
Well, because in name, they're at high school. What now? But really, it's just the next level. It's just, you've come this far. Well, it's just another year. Let's see how it goes. Maybe it might have changed back then. It might have changed. There were some changes in books or whatever we used. But I didn't find it was daunting. I suppose it wasn't the early high school years. It was more the later high school years that I felt more daunted by. But again, when you got there, it was just, oh, well, yeah, each year children develop, their own interests come out. I think as children get older, some of my children, when their maths, it was beyond me. And it's not like I thought, oh, I'm just going to have to work at night and understand, so I can help. But children, I think homeschool children learn to become independent learners. They learn how to learn. I remember one of my sons, he'd say, oh, no, I'm stuck. I need help. And, well, by this time he was his second to last year of school. I'm thinking, this is beyond me. But I would just stand there. He would stand beside him. He would read the problem out loud as he was thinking. And he'd say, oh, I know now. And it was just like he needed someone to talk to about it. I said nothing, but all of a sudden it clicked and he could do it. As children get older, we become more like facilitators and helping them to get, what they need. Well, our eldest son went did an apprenticeship, so he didn't do any external sort of exams. He just got an apprenticeship, which you could do that back then. Our next son also went into an apprenticeship. Our three younger children wanted to go to uni, and we decided to go the Cambridge route. And I think it was good from the point of view of when you go to uni, there's a certain expectation that you need to, you've got to get through work in a certain, be able to do that. And I think the Cambridge exams were good preparation for that, because there's pressure. It's not just working, well, they were working at their pace, but you've got to get somewhere by this. And I think it also was a good thing for them to prove to themselves that they could or couldn't do it, rather than me saying, oh, yes, yeah. So in that way, I think I found that was a good way to go. And there's certainly, again, not early high school, but as children are going to do exams or whatever, there are tutors around. I remember having a lady come in, my daughter would go to her place and she would get some tuition in statistics she did, and also chemistry. Or the teacher really enjoyed just talking to her, and I think it was more just the confidence, someone other than me. I think she went once a week or once every 2 weeks. It was more when she was having trouble, when she would sort of give her a ring. I remember her saying, this teacher, because she did relieving, and she rang me one day and she said, why doesn't she go to school? Schools need girls like her as good role models. I'm thinking, oh dear. Okay. And yet the next child down, when he went off to her, he didn't like it. He just wanted the help that he needed and get going, He didn't like this, just have a chat and sit around and talk and, talk about what's going on in your life. So children are different. We had another lady, and she helped our youngest daughter, who was interested in accounting. And this lady was Thai, and she was new to New Zealand, and she'd been an accountant back in Thailand, and she didn't have work. She'd come every Tuesday afternoon from 1 till 3, and she'd do accounting with our youngest daughter. It was really interesting because her pronunciation was such that we didn't like to correct her because we thought it was so cute. So our youngest daughter and two of her brothers ran a business. This is another thing you can do when you're homeschooling. You have business on the side. Our eldest son was working by this time, but Abigail would do the books for the business, and this dear lady taught Abigail how to do the books, and so she taught her. And I used to sit in. I thought, oh, I'll listen in because I'd quite like to learn accounting. But oh, man, it was pretty intensive. It was too fast paced for me. I would have lapped it all up and did really well with learning, running the business. But my other son, the son up, we worked at the kitchen table. He would always come into the kitchen when this dear lady came, because he liked listening to her. So here's an example. She could, for electricity, she would say electric city. And then, she had trouble with cash, the sh, so she'd say cats. And we thought this was really hilarious because she was a real cat lover. Yeah, they're fun things. But yes, it was lovely to have her. And she came, I think, for a couple of years. And by that time, Abigail got up to doing the Cambridge accounting. And this lady said to her, well, you've got all the practical. Now you just need to do the theory. And I think it really helped her understanding this theory stuff when you've done the practice. Because our youngest, there comes a time when there's the last child. She and I did a quilting course one morning a week. I'd done followed a bit of a home economics course, and we'd made a quilt using chalk and rulers for measuring and all this sort of stuff. So we went and we took it to the quilting shop to get the backing and the batting stuff. They were quite impressed, but then they were telling us about these courses they run. So, that was really nice to go and do something like that together, which was easier because if she was our first child, that would have been harder for me to go along and do with her. But that was I don't know if that helps. That sort of covers some of those things.
We got tutors in too, because as I said earlier, maths is not my strong point. English is, and I love to read, but maths not so much. So we just got a tutor. And my sister, who was a teacher, when she found out that we were outsourcing, she said, "That's cheating. You're supposed to be homeschooling." I just thought, oh gosh, well, that's rich. Who died and made you the arbiter of what one does and doesn't do in the homeschooling? And I just smiled and went, okay. Her perceptions of what she'd caught me out. I was cheating. Was she going to tell on me as well? Oh dear. Okay, so
online, a lot of online videos. Some of the maths courses do have online tutorials or videos that show the lesson, explain. And there's Khan Academy too, which is available. There are so many resources now, whether you choose to go down the apprenticeship route for your teenager at home, prepping for university, looking for something alternative. I interviewed Maxim Smith the other week as one of the alternatives for young men. That there are some really exciting alternatives now, while we're waiting for universities to get over their socialist selves. Michaela, if you wouldn't mind helping us out with this next question, and while I'm waiting for you to pop on, if there's any questions from people who are watching today that you'd like Rosalind and I to tackle, do just pop them in the chat. But one of the questions we had coming through a couple of weeks ago, what about travelling homeschooling families? What does a family particularly need to consider? In other words, what could be the effects on the children with no ongoing home base? And it was kind of answered a little bit there, but Michaela, have you got anything to say to folks about that? I would say too that I remember someone I knew, they'd been travelling around, or their family had moved. I suppose ministers particularly, they go to different churches, and this man said he'd grown up and his father had been a minister, so they'd gone, I think he said every 3 or 4 years they'd travelled around. This was in the States, and this was going back a long time. and he'd grown up like that. So when they moved to New Zealand, it wasn't such a big deal because they'd moved a lot in their lives. And I remember talking to him a bit. I said, well, what was that like, moving like that, regularly? He said, well, he said he was one of 8 children. He said the important thing is that mum and dad are mum and dad, that we are a family, and the family stayed together, and the family made home wherever they were, and just I think that strong family connection that, well, we might be here or we might be there or we might wherever we are, the stability, the same expectations, same, I suppose, routines. We're here, we're together, and where the location might be different, but we still operate the same. We are family, and I think that's a constant. That's really important. That children need that constancy, and that we're there, we're together.
Yes. Rosalind, is there, if you were just going to give, say, one piece of advice to a homeschooling, well, a family who are considering homeschooling, could you pick out just one gem, or have you got like a little handful of gems that you would consider important? What advice would you give?
It requires commitment.
Mm-hmm.
I think we shouldn't be in any that there are, with homeschooling, there are things that you don't, there's a certain amount of time in a day, and there's certain things, because we're doing this, that I won't be able to do this. You need to be realistic about being realistic about what it is, and it's a commitment. I think I've helped a lot of people over the years. A lot of people have come to me and asking about homeschooling, and I think some stick with it and some don't, and that whatever, it doesn't really, but I think it really does come down to commitment. And I think looking back on those who have and those who haven't, it's come down to commitment. I don't mean that in a negative sense either, but you need to be the one that's motivating your kids. It's on the days they don't feel that, and if you're not, you've got to have that love for the subject. Otherwise, that's not imparted, and it just becomes drudgery for children. And I think the other thing is that a parent who is more concerned for the welfare of the child than a parent, and in that way, I think parents can do very well because you know your children better than anyone else. You pick up on those little nipping things in the bud, especially character traits or things. You nip those in the bud, and you see them. Whereas, and that's they're great opportunities to be able to do that. To have that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's no one right way to homeschool. What worked for us may not work for someone else. And just because we were at home for most of our children all the way through, that may not be the right or appropriate thing for another family. And there are no shoulds. You're the expert in your children, like you just said, Rosalind. The other advice I would say is something that kind of took me by surprise, and I didn't realise it till like years looking back. I had high expectations, of course, for what it was going to be like for the children, how much they were going to be filled with this awe and this wonder of the world around them, so they would never stop learning. But it's what it did to me that took me by surprise. I am a completely different woman now than what I would have been had I never have gone down this route. Now, I know I can't go backwards and do all that again, but I have peers and family that I can go, well, if I'd just gone down that route, the chances are I would be more like this. But I am so much more. The books that I have been exposed to that we just didn't get in our high school years, the history, the travel, the art, the wonderful opportunities, and being with our children. I mean, okay, I had some pretty black days sometimes. There were days when I threw myself down on the bed crying, wondering what on earth I had done, and I was ruining my children. But they were very, very few. More than anything else, we had some really, really good days, and they love each other's company still. They have particular good relationships with different ones in the family, but they still seek each other's company out. They seek my husband's and my company out, even as adult children. They want to come and visit us. They want to come on holiday with us. We didn't want to with our parents. And so that the benefits of your family life, I think, will take you by surprise. And it's an amazing adventure. And I think just get on and do it. And when you fall down, get back up again. If you need help, go and ask for it. If you need someone to consult with, find someone like me. And it's a great life. I would say to someone, yes, just do it. Just get on and do it. Yeah.
Yep.
And that, unless there's something else on your mind, Rosalind, has anything else popped up?
No. Oh, we could talk for hours.
I know. Yeah, me too. I love talking about it.
One little thing I've been doing these holidays, I've just finished, I've been cleaning out our schoolroom, which is a bedroom. It used to be one of my kids, but they've all left. And it's had all my school resources, all my schooling resources. And I've always kept all my children's writing books, the books that they wrote their stories in. And so I had put them on 5 different piles, and I've just given them to all my children. And we have one son who lives local, and they've also got 5 children. And this little boy, he was looking at his dad's stories. He was reading them, and every night at dinner time, apparently, he reads out one of these stories. And he said to us, "Oh, we have such a boring life. Dad, you had such an exciting childhood." And and it's quite funny because my son will sort of photograph one of these stories and put it on the family WhatsApp, and everyone, I remember that. And I suppose that's the thing about, just writing all those experiences, writing about them. I just thought, they'll probably toss them away, but it's interesting. They've all been saying, I've been reading those books. And yes, it's I didn't read them myself. I never would have got the room tidied up. But, that's the beautiful thing about homeschooling, isn't it? And you're doing things with your children rather than for your children. I think that's a real difference that I note. You're not taking them to school or being the taxi. You're doing things with them. Yes. They're precious times.
Yes, they are. And it was my career. That's how I viewed it. I didn't stop a career to become just a mum. No way. This was my career. And I wouldn't have swapped it for the world. Not at all.